Hello, dear viewers. It's time for your 24-hour news update right here on our YouTube channel, bringing the latest and trending issues directly to you. There's a lot happening, so let's get right into it. In a recent statement, Par Ryder, the spokesperson for the U.S. Department of Defense, disclosed a series of 6 different attacks. He shared that 3 of these were directed at the U.S. airbase in Al-Assad, Iraq, and the rest targeted U.S. facilities stationed in Syria. Thankfully, no lives were lost in these incidents, but we have confirmation of 46 U.S. soldiers sustaining varying degrees of injuries from these multifaceted missile and drone attacks on U.S. military bases in the Middle East. This sudden surge in attacks seems to coincide with the recent Israel-Hamas conflict. Currently, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is the Middle East to hold discussions on strategies to de-escalate tensions in the Gaza Strip. While in Iraq, Secretary Blinken didn't mince words, accusing Iran of being behind these attacks and issuing a stern warning that the U.S. would take all necessary steps to safeguard its soldiers and bases in the region. His Middle East visit has drawn considerable attention, as the leaders of Arab nations voice heightened worries about the potential of conflict spreading from Gaza to other parts of the Middle East. Blinken was heard stating, "We are resolute in our determination to prevent escalation on any front, whether it's northern Israel, southern Lebanon, the West Bank, or any other place in the region." He stressed the importance of having dialogues to establish the best for lasting peace and security for both Israel and Palestine. While Arab nations continue to condemn all acts of violence against civilians and any breaches of international law, including attacks on infrastructure and civilian properties, there has been a shift in the rhetoric. Some Arab countries have transitioned from simply condemning violence to openly criticizing Israel's actions in Gaza. Meanwhile, militant groups with ties to Iran have taken responsibility for the attacks, warning that more attacks will follow if the U.S. continues its support for Israel. As it stands, the U.S. has approximately 2,500 troops deployed in Iraq and 900 stationed in Syria. With tensions in Gaza potentially spiraling outwards, U.S. officials worry that their military bases across the Middle East could become targets for future attacks. We hope you found this update informative and will continue to track these events and bring you the latest news as it unfolds. Stay tuned for more updates. A recent update from Amman, Israel's military intelligence agency, has unveiled the names of key political and diplomatic officials from Hamas operating on a global scale. These prestigious figures manage the affairs of Hamas from a distance. The foreign-based Hamas leadership is accountable for 3 main sectors: the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and international relations. The influence these officials wield within the supreme executive body of Hamas, the organization's key decision-making council, is considerable. At the forefront of this list is Ismail Haniyeh, the helmsman of Hamas's political wing, currently based in Qatar with frequent diplomatic missions to Iran, Lebanon, and Turkey. Sami Abu Zuhri, who oversees the Gaza Strip, is presently stationed in the United Kingdom. Another figure, Mohammed Deif, spearheads Hamas's actions in the West Bank, also operating from Britain. Beyond this, numerous foreign-based Hamas leaders function unofficially, chiefly overseeing fundraising and orchestrating the resistance activities of the group. Notable amongst these are former leaders Khaled Meshal and Musa Abu Marzouk, and ex-Hamas Interior Minister Fathi Hamad. This widespread network has resulted in countless international demonstrations supporting the Palestinian cause and protesting recent events. A significant gathering of pro-Palestinian activists in Washington, D.C. called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. These protests grew intense, resulting in obstructions and on Independence Avenue outside the U.S. Capitol, with security forces detaining about 500 protesters. Meanwhile, in Iraq, roughly 300 people assembled in the Green Zone, amidst various foreign embassies and U.S. government offices, voicing their dissent against the ongoing violence in Gaza. In Tunis, demonstrators lit the flags of Israel and the U.S. on fire, demanding the expulsion of U.S. and French embassies due to their perceived unwavering backing of Israel. Lebanese protesters denounced the events in Gaza as an act of genocide, calling for a resolution to the conflict. A violent protest at the Israeli embassy in Beirut was dispersed by police. In Yemen, thousands gathered in the capital, Sana'a, to show their support for the Palestinian people. Recently, the chairman of the European Commission, EC, outlined 5 guiding principles for Gaza's future after the Israel-Hamas conflict. These principles focus on a 2-state resolution, which includes ending Hamas's control over the Gaza Strip and lifting the blockade imposed by Israel and Egypt since 2007. However, the EC admits the proposed principles may seem ambitious in a still-raging conflict. The international community is thus called upon to strive for a long-term peaceful solution, safeguarding the coexistence and security of both Israel and Palestine. The EC chairman has announced an additional €25 million in financial aid for the people of Gaza, pushing the region's total aid for 2023 to a considerable €100 million. As the EU continues to mull over the idea of a humanitarian sea corridor, the port of Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt emerges as a promising central point. Aimed at facilitating the transport of humanitarian assistance to Gaza through the Rafah border crossing, this initiative is a beacon of hope. The EU, as ever, supports Israel's right to self-defense according to international law, but simultaneously advocates for the establishment of a humanitarian corridor and ceasefire. This would allow for the essential provisions of food, water, and fuel to reach the desperate populace of Gaza. In related events, the Dutch Minister of Defense, Kajsa Ollongren, emphasized the need for a ceasefire during a visit to Sarajevo, Bosnia. Deeply concerned about the Gaza situation, the minister believes that aid must reach the people promptly to prevent further catastrophes. Simultaneously, Ollongren calls for a humanitarian pause in the Israel-Hamas conflict to prevent civilian casualties and a potentially catastrophic exodus. The essential supplies for Gaza's 2.3 million residents are dwindling due to Israel's blockade, adding urgency to the situation. Despite the ban on some protests in France, thousands across many nations have taken to the streets, their voices in harmony with support for Palestine. On the other side of the globe, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi conveyed his deep concerns about the violence and civilian casualties in a telephonic conversation with Iran's President Ebrahim Raisi. In a significant development, the U.S. State Department confirmed that its diplomats drafted a memo presenting two demands: supporting a ceasefire and adopting more balanced approach in all dealings concerning Israel. Open discussions about concerns over Israel's military tactics and treatment of Palestinians were encouraged. The memo recognizes Israel's legitimate rights and obligations under international law, emphasizing a more cautious discussion of these issues. There is a rising concern among U.S. diplomats over the Biden administration's approach to the Middle East. This memo, although sensitive but unclassified, underlines that concern and could potentially complicate the administration's policy-making efforts for the region. The U.S. State Department, while not directly commenting on the memo, mentioned that Secretary of State Antony Blinken is open to such arguments and gives serious consideration to individual views.